Charlie first.
Delivery Malaysia 370, good morning.
Malaysia 370, standby. Malaysia 370, request level.
370, we are ready, requesting flight level 350 to Beijing.
On the 8th of March of 2014, one of the biggest disappearances in recorded aviation history happened. A Boeing 777 dubbed MH370 from Malaysia Airlines had disappeared after what seemed like a simple flight from Malaysia to China. This year marks the 10th year anniversary since the disappearance of this notorious aircraft, and even till this day we have no idea as to what could have happened to it. So, why haven't we found it? And where is Flight MH370? So, in order to understand what this mystery is about, we first need to know what happened prior to the day of the disappearance. On the 7th of March of 2014, a flight was scheduled from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, over to Beijing, China, through the aircraft from the Malaysian company, Malaysia Airlines, a Boeing 777 that was named MH370. On board, there was Captain Zahari Ahmad Shan, First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid, 10 crew members, and 227 passengers. The plane took off from the Malaysian International Airport at 12:41 a.m. Then around 1:19 a.m., the plane was crossing over the South China Sea and was about to enter Vietnamese airspace. The crew communicated this to the Malaysian Air Traffic Control.
Malaysian 370, maintaining level 350.
Malaysian 370. Malaysian 370, contact Ho Chi Minh 120.9. Good night.
Good night, Malaysian 370.
However, 2 minutes later, the plane simply disappeared from all radars. At 1:30 a.m., the Malaysian military and civilian radar began tracking the plane as it turned around and then flew southwest over the Malaysian peninsula and then northwest over the Strait of Malacca. At 2:22 a.m., the Malaysian military radar lost contact with the plane over the Andaman Sea. And after that, at 2:40 a.m., the Vietnamese Air Traffic Control in Ho Chi Minh confirms to the Malaysian Air Traffic Control how they hadn't detected the plane over their airspace. After that, at around 6:30 a.m., the time that the flight was scheduled to land, worry started to rise among all of the family members or loved ones that didn't know where the plane was and couldn't get an answer from the airlines. Also, and this is my own personal feeling, I find it so surreal to believe that on the flight chart, the plane appeared as delayed, like it was going to appear in a few minutes or hours past 6:30 a.m. Also, and this is worth pointing out as well, is that during the first hours after the plane went missing, a Chinese woman received a phone call from one of the passengers on board. But after a few seconds, the call was ended abruptly, which I also find so surreal. Later, after the distress of the people and the pressure that was starting to build up upon the Malaysian and Chinese airlines, the search started across different areas that the plane could have disappeared. Flights, ships, and submarine searches started around the Gulf of Thailand, the South China Sea, the Indian Ocean, the Strait of Malacca, the Andaman Sea, and the Bay of Bengal. On March 15th, 1 week after the disappearance of the plane, the search had expanded after realizing that after the last contact with the Malaysian military radar, An Inmarsat satellite started receiving signals from Flight 370 and determined that the flight might have gone anywhere around two possible arcs. The first one, stretching from Java southward into the Indian Ocean and later into southwest of Australia. The second one, stretching northward across Asia from Vietnam to Turkmenistan. On March 24th, Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak announced that, based on analysis of the final signals, Inmarsat and the UK Air Accidents Investigation Branch, they had concluded that the flight crashed in a remote part of the Indian Ocean 1,500 miles southwest of Australia and indicated how it was very unlikely for anyone to have survived. This actual statement caused a lot of anger among all of the ones that had a close one on that plane, because they felt that the airline either wasn't cooperating properly or knew where it was or what happened to the plane, but they didn't want to say anything about it, which caused a lot of issues and internal riots. And also, what caused anger among the people was the fact that they declared that all of the passengers had died, but couldn't confirm it because they didn't know where or what happened to the actual plane. On 2015, 1 year after its disappearance, a piece from what seemed to be from the actual MH370 plane appeared on the island of Reunion, close to Madagascar. And this initiated a process in which more pieces were being found on different parts close to the Indian Ocean. 32 additional pieces were found after this main discovery, from which 3 were identified as likely, 8 as highly likely, and 7 as almost certain being from MH370. However, only 3 pieces were confirmed to be from the actual flight, while the remaining 11 were unidentifiable. The first theory talks about the pilot. People pointed their finger over him, talking about how he was dealing with personal issues and how he wanted to take his own life and everyone else's with it as well. To summarize this theory, the way the events unfolded was the following. The pilot communicates for the last time with Malaysian Air Traffic Control at 1:19 a.m. and 2 minutes later, at 1:21 a.m., he switches off all of the communication gears, tells the co-pilot to bring something for him, and when the co-pilot left, he locks the cockpit door. After that, he makes a turn over the Malaysian peninsula and depressurizes the cockpit as well as the whole plane. The oxygen masks fall off and people don't know why, but they just wear them without realizing Sahari's plan. However, because the aircraft has a limited oxygen reserve, the passengers all die after running out of oxygen and suffocating. After that, he starts traveling across the Andaman Sea and supposedly turns to the Indian Ocean, where he keeps flying for 7.5 hours and lets the plane fall into the water. This theory was refuted by the fact that, a couple of days after the plane's disappearance, the FBI had examined his house and his belongings and had found a made-up route scenario in Microsoft Flight Simulator that went through the Malaysian peninsula over to the Indian Ocean and then close to Western Australia. And this route map was planned days before the actual disappearance. However, the theory is not confirmed and it's not likely for it to have happened because the pilot hadn't, in his psychometric documents, raised suspicions of having psychological or any other kind of issues prior to the day of the disappearance. And also, in the Netflix documentary that was made about this whole case, which was the inspiration to this actual video, the cast interviewed a French journalist called Florence Chanchy, and she said how she didn't believe that the pilot wanted to kill himself and everyone else because she believed that he was just a normal pilot that even made normal videos that were guided towards fixing stuff, like a window for example, and of course, flying. Now, the second theory was put together by a journalist called Jeff Weiss. Now, he was, alongside another flight tech expert, Mike Extern, one of the members of the somewhat group called the Independent Group. And the ones that formed part of this group had a very strict belief and/or rule towards what happened to the plane. Basically, every single person that conformed this group believed that the plane had been hijacked, gone south, and ended in some part of the Indian Ocean close to Australia. However, this theory begins when Jeff gets all of the flight and Inmarsat radar information and notices how one paragraph of the whole entire documentation of Inmarsat's states that the communication gear had been turned off and then it was simply turned on again or restarted, and he wondered, if you want to disappear a plane off the face of the earth, then why would you want to restart or turn the communication gears back on? So he started investigating as to another possible explanation as to what really happened to the plane, and he discovered that most pilots are not taught as to how to access or turn off the communication gear or any other crucial piece of equipment, because it's all made to prevent the plane from simply just disappearing off of radars. However, he discovered that all of that equipment is simply just hidden under a rug that sits between the first class and the cockpit. And he also discovered how it was possible to actually modify and/or alter the route data that a plane is capable of. So he started digging and he came up with a possible explanation as to how the plane truly disappeared. He stated that someone on the plane was able to control the flight to his own wish, and he pointed his finger over the Russian military forces and how, supposedly, they were responsible for the missing plane. Now, one thing that made him believe that the Russian military forces or a Russian secret agency had planned this is because later on the 17th of July of 2014, another plane from Malaysia Airlines was shot down over Ukraine, and people thought that this had been achieved through a Russian missile. So from here, Jess thought that the MH370 disappearance was put up as a distraction mechanism from what had happened back in February of that exact same year. And plus, he thought that his theory made sense because on the plane there were 3 Russians on board. So the events unfolded like this. At 1:15, the plane is crossing over the South China Sea and is about to enter a freeze zone, whether neither Malaysia nor Vietnam can determine where the plane is. And this is where the 3 Russians start the plan. They distract one of the stewardess with a disturbance on the bathroom while the other Russian goes towards the hatch. He then connects his computer to the flight control system, and then, at 1:20 a.m., he disrupts the gears and takes full control of the airplane. He then depressurizes the whole plane and he turns off all of the oxygen emergency systems. The pilots, as well as all of the passengers, lose consciousness, and the Russian guides the plane towards Kazakhstan while altering the Inmarsat data to make it register like the plane had gone south. This proposed theory was so controversial that Jeff was banned out of the group, and even Mike Extern criticized him, saying that he knew how radar systems worked and that it was impossible for the plane to have ended north instead of south like it was proposed. However, people still thought that the plane had been hijacked, but not through Russians like Jeff insisted, but rather 2 passengers that were traveling abroad with fake passports. However, it was later confirmed that they were mostly seeking asylum and they didn't travel with the intention of hijacking the plane. So guys, this second part of the video was put together by the help of 2 of my bestest friends. So I would like to thank them first of all, and also let you know that for privacy reasons we're not going to be mentioning their names. So yeah, with that out of the way, we can now continue. Now, this last theory that we're going to talk about today was put together by the previously mentioned French journalist called Florence de Chanchy. However, before we talk about her and the theory, we have to talk about another guy called Blaine Gibson. Blaine Gibson, after the discovery of the flaperon in the island of Reunion, said how he wanted to look around different parts close to the Indian Ocean to try and find other remainings of the missing aircraft. So he went around different parts of Africa, like Mozambique and Madagascar for example, and he managed to find the highest amount of debris from the supposed MH370 plane. In total, he managed to find over 20 pieces just by himself.
However, this didn't stop people from pointing their fingers over him, accusing him of being a spy and how he was being accomplice of a massive cover-up put either by the US, Russia, or even China. What people were saying is that debris wasn't from the missing plane, but rather from another aircraft, and they weren't simply put up these locations to make people think that the explanations towards what happened to the MH370 was simply just a plane crash. Blaine heard these accusations and denied them all, so that's why Florence started digging and found how the flaperon was confirmed to be from the actual MH370 flight was missing its ID plate, and how also investigators had sent the manufacturer of the MH370 12 serial numbers to try and find records of the document on the plant that would indicate that the debris found was indeed from the MH370. However, she later found out that the only one of those serial numbers matched, and she believed that that wasn't enough evidence in order to establish without a doubt that the flaperon was part of the MH370. Also, she discovered that there is only one instance in which the flaperon of a plane can be missing that's a D plate, and that's where the plane dismantled. So, she thought that the media was not telling the true story.
So she started investigating again, and she noticed that on the flight report, it stated that MH370 was carrying 2.4 tons of technological gadgets such as lithium-ion batteries, walkie-talkie accessories, chargers, etc. And she also discovered that this cargo hadn't been scanned. So she proposed that the US had heard of this cargo last minute and how they didn't want China to be in possession of these gadgets. So that's the motive behind the plane's disappearance.
Also, she stated that she started talking to a guy that was a former member of the US Air Force and how supposedly it was possible that two AWACS intercepted the flight that night and how they had incredible jamming capacity. After hearing that from Florence, who thought that this interference capacity was responsible for the loss of contact with MH370. So, after this very extensive background, she came up with this hypothetical scenario that she felt was more acceptable than the official version. The events unfold like this.
It's 11:20 p.m. on March 7th, and the suspicious cargo is about to get loaded onto the plane. Without it being scanned and arriving under escort, then everything is completely normal. The plane takes off at 12:40 a.m. and at 1:20 a.m. the plane is requested to change over to Vietnamese airspace. The pilot says good night, and the plane enters the previously mentioned free zone, and that's when an AWACS intercepted the plane.
They jammed the communication systems, making it disappear from the radars, and Zahir receives an order from the AWACS, telling him to land somewhere. Zahir refuses to land and continues with the planned route towards Beijing. The plane is getting closer to the Chinese airspace, and the AWACS have to back off. But because they have to avoid this cargo from reaching its final destination, they shoot down the plane via either a targeted missile strike or a mid-air collision.
Florence admits that it sounds far-fetched and that it has some loose ends and contradictions, like the fact that it doesn't take into account the military radar and Inmarsat data. But she is certain that this theory makes more sense than the official version. But even this statement, it couldn't avoid all the criticism Florence received. Mike Exner criticized her as well, saying that the only thing that theorizes like that do is to distract them from the actual data, and they only seek attention or generate publicity via forums or by publishing books. Mark Dickinson, a worker from Inmarsat and one of the many others who collaborated with the MH370 investigation, also say how it wasn't true, that the Inmarsat data had been modified and or altered, and that all of the theories lack data and information.
And even Blaine Gibson criticized Florence's theory, saying that it was impossible for the plane to have been completely shot down over the South China Sea, because therefore the sea would be completely filled with debris, and when the investigators went towards the plane's last known location over the South China Sea, they didn't find anything.
However, some people still theorize that the cargo of lithium-ion batteries or an electrical malfunction had caused a fire mid-flight, causing damages to the communication gears and the pilot's tried going back towards Malaysia in order to attempt an emergency landing. However, that wouldn't be the case, given that the plane continued to fly for more than 7 hours after the loss of communication.
There are also plenty of other theories that were put up by many more people. Some people think that the plane simply crashed and the remainings went underwater. Some others theorize that the passengers as well as the pilots suffered from hypoxia due to the failure to pressurize the plane or an oxygen leak. The plane traveled that far in autopilot, and even some people believe that the plane either entered a portal similar to what goes down near the Bermuda Triangle. That made a plane enter an alternate reality or a loop in time, and some people even think that the plane was abducted by UFOs. And the theory is a little bit more extensive than you may think, because originally a video was uploaded to YouTube a couple of days after the plane's disappearance.
In that video, what seems to be the MH370 plane is surrounded by 3 orbs and later disappears into thin air without any trace. However, 3 visual effects artists from the channel Corridor Crew debunked the video, explaining what it was actually fake and how it was put out. If you would like to watch the entire video, it's linked in the description below. However, 4 years later, in 2018, there was a case of Straight Away, which is a different and extensive topic, but many believed that at the time that this solved the huge enigma that is the case of MH370, and how supposedly the passengers on board discovered something non-human. However, most of these theories are not based in facts and documentation, but rather paranormal or other beliefs with no further arguments, trying to find a cause to whatever happened to MH370.
So, what did we conclude today? Well, it's hard to actually pinpoint a true conclusion from this case given all of the little loose ends that this one has. We're not trying to make anyone believe in any of the theories presented, let alone convince anyone of a true answer, and not even try to pinpoint what happened to the plane and where it could have ended up. But at least we can draw something from all of this, and that is that, at least for now perhaps, we won't be figuring out the mystery behind the disappearance and what truly happened to Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370. That's why we can leave it to our own imagination, and all theories and our standpoints are acceptable. But what we can in fact do is to remember all of the ones that were on board that day and never let this mystery be forgotten.
Good night, Malaysia 370.
Anyways, I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thanks again to my 2 bestest friends for participating on this video with me and doing extensive research as well. You can also let me know what other videos you would like to see in the very near future, and hope to see you on my next one. Thanks for watching and have a wonderful day.